All right. Well, good evening. My name's Pat Showalter, and I'm going to serve as your moderator this evening for this candidates forum we're having, sponsored by the Mountain View Los Altos League of Women Voters. It's also co-sponsored by the Palo Alto League of Women Voters, the American Association of University Women, and Los Altos Library, and KMTV, who is kind enough to be recording this for us this evening. The forum is going to be, first we'll have the candidates for district attorney. We're very fortunate to have both Dolores Carr and Jeff Rosen here this evening. And then, and that will take place this first hour, and then the second hour will be the two candidates for sheriff that will be here. So it's important to always say that the views expressed at these League of Women Voters forums are the views of the candidates. They're not the views of the League of Women Voters or any of the sponsoring agencies. It's one of the important concepts behind the League of Women Voters is to be neutral. So we provide this as a, these candidates forums as a service so that everyone can learn about the candidates' views really directly from the horse's mouth. So that's what we're going to do tonight. We have a few ground rules. One is that there'll be a 2-minute opening statement by each of the candidates, and then there will be a series of questions, and we're going to be collecting questions all during the program. So you should have received some index cards. If people need more index cards, raise your hand and they'll be delivered to you. And then also raise your hand when you have it written on, and they'll be collected, and they're going to be sorted by our volunteers, Crowley, Billick, and Coweta Chambers. So first off, I'd like to welcome Jeff Rosen and Dolores Carr. And we had they picked out of a hat who would go first, and Dolores Carr won. So Dolores, will you give us your 2-minute statement, please?
And the timekeeper is...
Oh, who is the timekeeper? Okay.
And is there do you just, when it's time is... Oh, you've got them. Okay, that's just what I wanted.
Yeah.
That's what I was looking for. Can you hear me? Oh, yes. Is that right there? So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming tonight. I'm running for re-election to be your district attorney, and I'm very proud of the great things we've done in the DA's office over my first term. I want to continue the good work we've done, and I'm very proud to lead hundreds of the great employees that I have at the DA's office working for you. As your district attorney, let me describe my job. It's taking criminals off the street to make our community safe. My job duties include managing an $85 million budget, leading almost 500 employees, and being responsible for over 45,000 cases every year, and I also have responsibility for the crime lab. When I ran for DA, I said I would take a fresh look at the office. One of the first things I did was ask for an outside audit. That was very helpful because one of the first things I needed to do was to cut $5 million from my budget. $3.5 million was left by my predecessor. So the audit helped us focus on where we could become more efficient and effective. I also invested in organizational development, which was helpful in guiding our leadership in a vision and setting standards and values. Crime prevention is also important, in addition to our top priorities, which have been fighting gangs and white-collar crime. In the crime prevention area, I funded with asset forfeiture funds safe summer programs for kids, and I brought the nationally acclaimed Parent Project to Santa Clara County, which is a parenting program to help parents get the skills they need to deal with their youth that are just getting into trouble. Where are we going, or where are we now? We're a more efficient and effective organization, more accountability. We've been successful in bringing the gang homicide rate down, which spiked in 2007. So you'll hear a lot from my opponent tonight about things he thinks I've done wrong. Things he it's very easy, I would say, to play Monday morning quarterback, but what is tough is actually doing the job, making the tough decisions, making the choices that we need to make sure that our community is safe. But what you won't hear is the leadership roles he's had in the office, because he hasn't had any. He's never been a supervisor or even applied to be the supervisor. So I think it's very important when you look at this race, who is the most qualified to be the district attorney, to manage an $85 million budget with the reductions that are coming down the pike, even more than we've had already, with the prison releases that we're facing right now, and with medical marijuana dispensaries opening up. And I'll be happy to answer questions this evening. Thank you.
Good evening. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for hosting this forum. My name is Jeff Rosen. I'm running for district attorney because I'm passionate about pursuing justice in a just way, in a way that's fair to everyone, that treats everyone equally and with respect. I have broad support in my run for district attorney, from the Santa Clara County Bar Association to the former District Attorney George Kennedy, to many police officer associations, elected officials. More prosecutors within the district attorney's office are publicly endorsing me for district attorney than Ms. Carr. More public defenders are publicly endorsing me than Ms. Carr. Why? Because I'm experienced, tough, and fair. I've been a prosecutor for 15 years, an attorney for 18 years. Before coming to the district attorney's office, I worked in large law firms in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., doing commercial and business litigation. I came to the DA's office in 1995. I'm tough. I've handled some of the most high-profile and difficult cases in the district attorney's office: rape, child molestation, murder. In fact, there are many cases that I've handled that you probably read about. The murder for hire in Los Gatos of a prominent restaurant owner, the triple murder in Santa Clara committed by an engineer that was fired. I'm tough, but I'm also fair. I'm very proud of the many convictions that I've gotten as a prosecutor to make the community safer. But I'm also proud of the cases that I've dismissed or reduced, because that was also justice. So my vision for justice as a district attorney is to bring back our cold case unit and our Innocence Project, to have open discovery for defense attorneys, to have supervisors carry a caseload, to have a different approach on officer-involved shootings, and finally, a fair elections pledge, which I've sent to Ms. Carr, and I mentioned to her at a debate about not beginning fundraising until a year before the election, to give us time to do the people's business. Thank you.
Thanks very much for both of your opening statements. So now we've moved on to the next portion of our program, which is to answer some questions. I have the first question here, and each candidate is going to get an opportunity to answer questions. We're just going to alternate who goes first and who goes second with each question. So Jeff, you'll answer the first question first, and then we'll switch. We'll keep using the timers. Thank you for your help. And it's each candidate will have a minute and a half to respond to each question. Okay. The first question is, what have you done in your career before this election to prepare yourself to lead a government agency with so many employees and an $85 million budget?
No, I believe you read the question correctly. I didn't have to show it to me. I'm 42 years old now. When I was 37, I became the youngest president of a temple in Palo Alto congregation called Emmett, a large temple that has 1,500 members, 20 full-time employees, and a budget of $1.5 million a year. During the time that I was president of the temple, we hired our first full-time female rabbi, which was a little bit controversial. But not too controversial, and she's worked out extremely well. In addition, I was responsible for hiring and firing, and I hired employees, and I unfortunately had to fire some as well. I, with my executive director, wrote a personnel manual, and I negotiated and wrote all of the contracts between the temple and our full-time staff. I learned about making change in an organization. We changed our dues structure, we hired new rabbis, and we changed our programming. And I understood that you don't just make change in an organization by saying, this is what I want to do, and everybody follow my lead. You need to build consensus and get people on board with you and be flexible and compromise. And those are skills that I learned. In addition, I learned about setting a budget. You know, the temple can't print money like the federal government can. And so there are a lot of things, in some ways the temple and the district attorney's office have many things in common. I mean, there are more Jews at the temple than the district attorney's office, but both organizations want to do more than they can afford. And so you have to set your priorities as to what's essential to your mission. And so when I become the district attorney, cold cases and conviction integrity are essential. Public information officers are not.
Dolores?
I've been a lawyer 30 years, practicing here in Santa Clara County. I was a deputy district attorney for 15 years. In my last 2 years, I was the supervisor of the sexual assault unit, where I charged every single sexual assault case that occurred in the county over that time, as well as supervised the senior lawyers who were on the sexual assault team. In addition, I was the president of the Government Attorneys Association, which is the labor organization representing public defenders and deputy DAs. So I learned about negotiations, about labor issues, about negotiating contracts, personnel issues from the labor side. After leaving the DA's office, I was elected to the Superior Court, where I was a judge for 6 years. I was appointed the supervising judge of the Family Division, which I did for 3 years. And at that courthouse, I managed the Family Division, the Child Support Courthouse, a separate courthouse, Family Court Services, the clerk's office, and had responsible for sitting on the budget committee representing the court as well. In addition, I was working on the Unified Family Court project assigned by the judge, presiding judge. But as the district attorney, I have done the job, and I've cut $11.7 million from my budget since 2007. And we've had to focus with the outside audit on more efficiencies and effectiveness. I've worked with our Government Attorneys Association from the management side now, and we've set in a number of processes in place to make sure that we are running properly. Thank you.
Okay, the second question. Are there any interest groups from which you would refuse campaign contributions? And please tell us why. Mrs. Clark?
I think there would be two main, and I've always had a policy since I ran for Superior Court judge in 1999 and then again in 2006, not to accept money from gambling interests, even though they're perfectly legal here in Santa Clara County, and also bail bonds companies, and those are legitimate businesses. And that's because it really is a sort of an inherent conflict with regard to gambling. Obviously, those give rise to crime. But the bail bonds company is a different issue because we argue every day in court whether there should be bail, whether there should be a release without bail, what the bail should be, and that's what drives the bail bonds company's profits. So even though I've been asked I've been actually given money by bail bonds companies, I've always returned it, not because, again, they're not legitimate, but because I think it creates an argument that we are going to or make decisions not based on the merits, but because perhaps we're influenced by those contributions. So I think that that those are the two areas where I've not formed a policy not to take money from those interests.
Mr. Rosen?
The issue of bail bonds is really a red herring. Individuals have the right to bail in our criminal justice system, and the court sets bail. So yes, I've accepted money from bail bonds companies. They're legal institutions, and it doesn't change any of the way that I've practiced as an attorney. The issue really is what do you do? Think about this for a second. Both of us as candidates take money from police officer associations, and obviously we deal with officers every day and judge their credibility and sometimes have to decide whether to prosecute a police officer. We both take money from criminal defense lawyers. Certainly criminal defense lawyers are representing clients that are before the district attorney's office all the time, and we both do that. But one thing that I haven't done and that I will never do is to do a favor for a campaign contributor, and that's a really fundamental bedrock principle. Unfortunately, and I say unfortunately, this district attorney did a favor for a campaign contributor's client who had raised thousands and thousands of dollars for her. This is something that was written about in the Mercury News. This was something that was on Channel 7, which asked, is justice for sale in Santa Clara County? When I'm the district attorney, it will not be for sale. Cases will be judged based on what the defendants did, not who represents them. Defendants will get the same offer whether they're represented by a fancy lawyer or they're represented by a public defender. One standard of justice for all. Thank you.
Okay, our next question. With the cuts in the budget that will come, how will these reductions impact the responsibilities of the district attorney's department?
We used to have many more district attorneys than we currently have now. We have about 168 now. We had more deputy district attorneys, probably 15 or 20 more over the last several years. What this has meant is that we have bigger caseloads and work harder, but we're still staffing misdemeanor courts and felony courts and doing everything that we can to provide safety for the public. You know, it's a really good question, you know, with these budget cuts. What are we going to do in the district attorney's office? How is this going to affect us? You know, the thing about budget cuts is it really makes you focus on what your mission is. When times are good, any organization can get a little bit away from its core, from its focus. When times are difficult and the money is short, you have to focus on your priorities. My priorities are public safety and the integrity of our convictions, meaning a cold case unit and an innocence project. When the district attorney came into office, she cut those two and said it's because we don't have enough money. But at the same time, she hired 2 press information officers, which we'd never had before, which cost $260,000 a year. I will focus on public safety, not on public relations. I believe that's what the citizens want and the citizens deserve. No spin to the press, just public safety and integrity of convictions. Thank you.
Well, the reduced budget has already affected our ability to do the same kind of work that we used to do. But again, I think it's putting the right person in the right job. So one of the things I've had to do is to spread work around where I couldn't specialize a lawyer in the same place, and that's what my opponent is talking about. We used to have a lawyer whose sole job it was to help investigators work on homicide cases that are old. That's traditionally a law enforcement function, a police department function, but when we had a lot of staff and a lot of money, we could put extra staff there. Well, we don't have that anymore, so we have to cut that back. But those cases are still being assigned. They're just spread out to other people who don't, who have other work to do, just as my opponent indicates. But it makes no sense to me to pay $185,000 to a lawyer to be a public information officer. And I can tell you that if we get rid of public information officers, the demand for information from you, the public, from our media, is not going to go away. And so who's going to do that? A lawyer who used to do it before I took office, who managed the homicide unit, sexual assault or gangs, the grand jury, and in addition to all of those management jobs, had to deal with the press as well. Every large DA's office in the state of California has a public information officer because it's important for you, the public, to know what is happening in public safety and out of our office, and it's putting the right person in the right place.
Okay, this time Dolores Clara will start, and we have kind of 2 questions here that are different sides of the same coin, so I thought we'd combine them. Okay, one is, what is the proudest moment of your career, and how does it relate to your ability to manage the DA's office? And then the flip side of that is, what is the worst mistake you've made in your career, and what have you done to prevent its reoccurrence?
So I don't know if I can answer both of those in 2 minutes, but I'll try. I would say I've had many proud moments. One of the things I did as a supervising judge of the family court was to put together a program that, even though I've been gone from the court now, or gone from the family court since 2005, still exists today. It became institutionalized because of the work I did there, and I'm very proud of that. And I intend actually to institutionalize the Parent Project throughout Santa Clara County before I leave office here. In terms of the mistake I made, yes, I don't think you're going to find a DA who's perfect. I would say that it was allowing my husband to work on a case civil case that where there was a connection in a criminal case. And at the time, there was not a conflict of interest when I said, yes, go ahead and take that job. But 6 months later, suspects were apprehended in a case that came to Mr. Rosen, and then it hit the papers. So when I've made a decision a long time ago, stepped up and said I made a mistake in that way. He will not work on any cases that have anything to do with a criminal nature, and so that will never happen again. But again, if you're looking for a perfect district attorney, out of 45,000 cases, that one mistake, we're not doing too bad.
So I'll answer the second part of the question first. Probably been a DA for about 3 or 4 years, and I had a case with this one defense attorney. He was kind of getting on my nerves, and I said to him, "You're not very smart." And I said, sort of more, not quite as nice as that sounds. "You're not a smart guy." And the look in his face, he just sort of turned white. And I could tell that I'd really hurt him. And I felt awful about what I had just said. And when I went to see him the next day, I said, "Look, I'm really sorry that I said that. I was really out of line, and would you please forgive me?" And he said, "Yes, I'll forgive you." So I haven't done that since, and I feel bad about that. In terms of the proudest moment or moments in my career, the last murder case I tried was a case that took place in 1994. It was a cold case, and it went unsolved for almost 20 years. And when the jury came, when we solved the case using DNA and working very diligently, the mother of the victim hugged me and said, "Thank you for bringing closure to what happened to my daughter." And I just felt wonderful that I've been able to help this woman and bring her closure, and also bring safety to the community and not have a murderer walking amongst us.
Okay, this next one is, how do you decide which cases to pursue and which ones shouldn't be pursued?
When we decide whether or not to issue charges in a case, there are 4 things that we look at. Number 1, has a crime been committed? Number 2, do we know who committed the crime? Number 3, can we prove to a jury beyond a reasonable doubt that this person committed the crime? And number 4, is there anything about this crime which maybe it wouldn't be in the community's interest or the public interest to prosecute? So those are really the 4 factors that we look at. And in my career, I've had cases where once we filed charges, through further investigation, I started to have doubts about whether the person really committed the crime. And recently I had a murder case where the defense did more and more investigation, and I became convinced that this person didn't commit the crime, and so I dismissed the charges. And that's what prosecutors do. We don't just rack up convictions. Our job is to seek and do justice. Sometimes people ask me, well, what do you do if you don't think somebody's guilty? That's not really a hard question for a prosecutor. That's an easy question. We dismiss the charges. Defense attorneys have an obligation to represent their client effectively and diligently, whether or not they think that the client's innocent or guilty. So in a situation where I have a doubt about somebody's guilt, I'll dismiss those charges.
Well, I've done that job at the district attorney's office, both as a deputy DA. I was one of the filing deputies for several years, and as well I've also mentioned the decisions I made as the sexual assault supervisor. It's important to understand that we have tremendous power as district attorneys, deputies in the office, because if we file a criminal case against you, we can ruin your life if we make the wrong decision. So it's very important as the leader of this organization to set standards. And once I came into the office, I had supervisory training, which had never been done before in the office, because it's important that we have accountability, that we are consistent so that we are charging everyone the same. And I think it's important to mention that I have not done a favor for a campaign contributor. That the case my opponent is talking about is a case that an attorney who supported me called, and I referred him to the supervisor of the unit of the case he was talking about. It was an 18-year-old who had stolen a computer, and he pled guilty to a misdemeanor petty theft, but instead of a misdemeanor grand theft, which was the charge he had been asked to plead to before, his life wasn't ruined. An 18-year-old who made a stupid decision by stealing a computer's life wasn't ruined by having to plead to a different misdemeanor, which would have affected his ability to come into America. He was studying at Stanford as a Mexico City a student, and that decision did not ruin his life.
Okay, this time it's Mrs. Clara's opportunity to go first. The San Francisco Crime Lab has recently had a huge scandal over how it's handled evidence. How do you feel about the crime lab in our district?
Well, I'm very proud of our crime lab. First of all, it's state-of-the-art. We are fortunate, unlike San Francisco, to have a brand new facility. It's at the corner of Heading and Guadalupe, down in the government center. But when I saw the news break, I went to my chief assistant, my number 2 in the office, and he oversees pretty directly the crime lab. And he goes to the operations meetings and meets with them on a weekly basis, if not more, on certain issues. And what we looked at was, can that happen here? Well, we have ways that we handle evidence in ways that San Francisco did not. And when I first took office, we had a case that had arisen when I was not the DA under my predecessor, and we had a problem with one of the criminalists. Well, when that happened, I asked DOJ, the Department of Justice, to send me one of their criminalist supervisors who came to our crime lab and did an outside audit. Again, spent a week with us, wrote up a report, looked at all of our operations to say, what can we do better? What aren't we doing well? And so we made some changes over there, and that's why I put my chief assistant to be directly responsible with our lab director. So can I guarantee that if somebody wants to steal something that they can't figure out a way to do it? Probably there's not very many guarantees in this world, but we have lots of oversight, and we've looked at those very issues to make sure that what happened in San Francisco won't happen in Santa Clara County.
I've worked with our criminalists very closely over the 15 years in my career as a district attorney, and they're excellent. You know, they're very highly trained, they're very objective, and they're really just outstanding. Occasionally we have had some issues in the district attorney's office, and one thing the district attorney left out is we did have an issue at some point a few years ago, which an internal investigation was done instead of bringing in an outside agency to do it. If there's problems within the crime laboratory, I'm going to be looking to outside agencies because I think it's difficult for us to investigate an agency that we direct. And so overall, you know, when I read what was happening in San Francisco, I felt bad for my in-laws who live in San Francisco. But really, we haven't had any issues like that in our crime lab, and it's really to all our credit.
Good. Okay. So please tell us why abolishing the innocence section of the DA's office is harmful or not.
We used to have an innocence project that worked with defense attorneys to look over old cases that we had when there was a question about the guilt of the defendant. And it was through the Innocence Project that Rick Walker was freed. He'd been convicted of murder, and it was really through that project that an innocent person was freed. Number 2, the Innocence Project also worked with law enforcement to develop the most professional and progressive techniques in law enforcement. So it was through the Innocence Project that we now require all of the police departments in the county to audio and videotape interviews of suspects in serious cases. It was through the Innocence Project that we changed the way we did photo lineups to try to minimize false identifications. And we don't have the Innocence Project anymore. David Angel is the one who is working on those issues. And so we're not providing that kind of guidance to law enforcement. But as a prosecutor, you know, I want to get the bad guys. But but only the bad guys. And I think the vast majority of our convictions are solid, but it's a human system. And with DNA evidence, we know that if we had that DNA evidence 15 or 20 years ago, there are a few people that wouldn't have been charged with the crimes they were charged with, that wouldn't have been convicted of the charges they were convicted of. And that's not fair. And so to do justice means, to convict people of only what they did, not more, and if they didn't commit the crime, to be freed of it.
Well, first of all, I think the question assumes what we call facts, not in evidence, because I did not abolish the Innocence Project. The Innocence Project is really a name of a unit made up of one lawyer whose full-time job was to investigate or review claims of innocence from people who were convicted of crimes. And during the budget cuts, as I indicated, we had to do a lot of things we didn't like, not do things as focused as we would like, because when you have to cut $5 million and then $4 million and then another $4 million up to $11.7 million, some things we're not going to be able to do as focused as we did before. We used to have 15 community prosecutors across the county. We now have 0. But we do spread those claims around. So they go to our law and motion department, and they are reviewed by people as an adjunct to their other assignments. So we do still look at those claims. In addition, I think it's important to understand that when people get convicted of crimes, felony crimes, there's an automatic appeal. All those cases get appealed. The Attorney General appears on our behalf usually at those appeals, and then the appellate court looks at them and renders a decision. And then if there's an appeal after that, the California Supreme Court takes that appeal. And then if there's an appeal after that, it's usually done through a habeas corpus, and those cases are filed, and then they come to our office and we review them. So in our justice system, there are many, many levels of review.
Okay, this one. Please comment on your decision to boycott a Superior Court judge.
Well, I think there's 3 things that are important to know, and that is that when with the recommendation of my senior staff, my second in command, 2 assistants, and my law and motion supervisor, that we all sat down and spent a tremendous amount of time looking at this situation. It was not in response to one particular case. It was in response to a series of cases that we had lost, that our supervisors and assistants, our executive managers, believed that we did not get a fair hearing from this particular judge over the course of these 3 years. Several of my lawyers refused to appear in this judge's court and were challenging her as they went. But this particular case was a case where a man had been convicted of molesting his granddaughter and sentenced to prison. It was reversed, sent back for a new trial. But rather than have a new trial, this particular judge, after hearing some motions, dismissed the case and let him out of prison, rather than having a new trial, based on the fact that the lawyer in the case, my lawyer, my prosecutor, had lied about some things that happened way after the trial, years after the trial, that had nothing to do with the trial itself. Now, I don't agree that the lawyer lied, but she's entitled as the judge to make that finding. But to dismiss that case and let that man out of prison without a retrial, as the Court of Appeal offered, was beyond her legal authority, and the Attorney General is appealing that decision on our behalf.
I very strongly disagree with the idea of blackballing criminal judges. This district attorney's decision to blackball Judge Andrea Bryan is unprecedented in the history of Santa Clara County, in the 150-year history of this county. And we've had liberal judges in this county before, and we've had very tough conservative prosecutors, but none of them ever took what you might call the nuclear option of blackballing a judge and saying no criminal cases will be brought before this judge. You know, in America, we have a system of checks and balances in our government between the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. And we have a microcosm of that in our criminal court system. The judges have certain powers, the prosecutors have certain powers, and defense attorneys have certain powers. And Ms. Carr's decision to blackball that judge undermines judicial independence. It's really turning the scalpel of recusal into a chainsaw, as legal expert called it, and it's not going to lead to the fair administration of justice. It does nothing for the child molestation victim in that case. It does nothing for the prosecutor. All it does is undermine confidence in the criminal justice system. And our job as the prosecutors, we're not just another litigant in court. We're there to uphold the integrity of the process. And so in my career, when judges have made rulings, usually in my favor, I've said, thank you, Your Honor. Occasionally, they've made decisions against me, and I've said, thank you, Your Honor. And if I really disagreed with the decision, I appealed it. That's the proper thing to do.
Okay, we have about 10 more minutes left of questions, and then we'll have the closing statements. But here's another one. Is there anything you could do in your role as district attorney to reduce the rate of recidivism?
To reduce the rate of recidivism? Yeah, there are things we can do. But I think the first thing to step back and to realize when you're thinking about the district attorney's office is we're sort of the last resort. In other words, the best route for success for any child is, a parent that loves them, a stable home, and whether they're rich or poor, if a parent loves them and the home is stable, they're going to do okay. And the problem is when kids come from broken homes, when someone's a drug addict in the house or the husband's in state prison, that child's going to have a difficult time. And so we as a society, through school, through social work, we try to support the family. In some sense, we're trying to build it up. But there's really no substitute for a family. The state can't provide that. And the district attorney's office, we do have some projects. The district attorney started a parent project in collaboration with the police department that tries to teach parents skills for being parents so that their children will not grow up and get into trouble. And that's very good, and that's a good program to have. But remember, at its core, the district attorney's office's job is public safety and integrity. And so it's when people are violent and they're committing crimes, at some point, we need to remove them from the society so that everybody else can live safely. And that's unfortunate, but that's where we are in the system. We're sort of at the back end there. And we try rehabilitation, but ultimately, our job is to protect you.
I think the district attorney has a role to play in helping to prevent recidivism, and we've talked a little bit about prevention. But what we really need to look at are these reentry programs, because what happens is people go to jail. So we're not talking about people who've raped or murdered and they're going to prison for 25 years, but we're talking about somebody who goes to jail for 6 months, maybe 9 months, maybe 120 days. Maybe that person usually has a drug or an alcohol problem. That person probably may even have some mental health problems. And so what happens is that person gets out of jail and, big surprise, no job and no support system, and very often they reoffend. So what we really need to do as a community, and the district attorney has a role to play, and I'm involved in those programs at my level. Mr. Rosa doesn't know that because he's a trial lawyer and that's not his job, but I do know that job. And so we work very hard in mental health court. We work collaboratively with our state and local assembly people, our legislators, our city councils, to really look at some of those programs. We meet regularly with the public defender, with probation, with the other stakeholders in community or in criminal justice, because what we look at, for instance, women's programs in the jail, how can we support them getting education, getting job training, getting the counseling that they need to be drug-free or alcohol-free so that they don't go back to jail.
Thank you. Okay. Ms. Carr, I think this one is yours also. The DA's office is funded by taxpayers. What is your fiscal track record, and what assurances can you offer voters that they'll get the most bang for the taxpayer buck?
Well, I think the proof is in the pudding, because the first thing I did as the DA, as I mentioned, in looking at our operations, was have an outside audit. So you've heard me say that several times now. I think it's very important for outside people who have skill in that area to come in and look at our operations. So that was very helpful. So we continue to look at ways we can improve in terms of being more effective and efficient in our resources, and we have to do that. We also aggressively seek grants, and we have been successfully funded in a number of areas in white-collar crime, for instance. And those that money all comes with regulations, but it's very helpful in having us focus on workers' comp fraud, workers' compensation fraud, on auto thefts, and other kinds of white-collar crime. We also, out of our office, proposed a legislation that tacks on $2 on recordings of real property documents, and that goes to pay for the real estate lawyers and investigators who work in that fraud area. So that's been very helpful. So we are always looking for ways to not only live within our budget from the general fund, but also seek outside funding so that we can do that work that is so important to keep our community safe. Because you know, with a $260 million deficit on the county side, that budgets are going to be incredibly awful for a very long time.
My track record, I'm one of those people that before I buy something, I save the money first and then buy it, which is sort of a revolutionary concept in America these days. It certainly isn't to some of my friends. Look, unfortunately, you know, a budget is a statement of one's values. And one thing we need to be clear on, when this district attorney cut the cold case unit and cut the Innocence Project, and it's eliminated in her 2007 budget, which I have here, at the same time, she hired 2 press information officers, 2 public information officers. Now, look, lawyers like to talk. Okay? We didn't pay extra to have press information officers who are not lawyers. So in terms of efficiencies, in terms of the taxpayer's buck, a reporter calls the public information officer, who's not a district attorney, not a prosecutor, not a lawyer, asks a question. The public information officer calls the deputy that has the case. The deputy calls the public information officer back and then tells the press. So that's not efficient. And we know from sort of broken telephone game that we played as a kid, things get lost in translation. So that's just an example of spending money on things that are not essential. Not essential. And you know, the fact is the district attorney has gotten horrible press. You can't spin the press. Okay? If I cut the press information officers we had and put that money towards public safety like cold case unit, probably get good press because it would be the right thing to do.
Okay, this will be the last question, and then we'll have the closing statements. Would you be willing to stop requesting the death penalty and instead request permanent incarceration?
I know that people feel very, very strongly on both sides of the issue of capital punishment, and people that are against it in all cases, I understand that that's a very moral and sincerely held position. I support the death penalty in rare circumstances for the worst of the worst. And I don't support it because I think it's a deterrent. I don't. I just believe that there are some cases where the crime is so heinous and the person that committed the crime has such a bad record that the appropriate moral response of a society is capital punishment. Now, that's very, very few cases. I've handled 20 to 25 murder cases in my career. Only one of them are we currently seeking the death penalty on. So I would only seek the death penalty in rare circumstances because it's the ultimate penalty. And one should approach it soberly and carefully. And when I'm the district attorney and we're deciding whether or not to seek the death penalty, I will be personally involved in that decision. The current district attorney does not sit in on the meetings that we have to discuss whether or not to seek the death penalty. Yes, we have 45,000 cases a year, but we're only considering seeking death on maybe 5 to 10 cases. As your elected district attorney, I will be intimately involved in those cases because what's more important than deciding whether or not we're going to seek the death penalty, the ultimate punishment?
Well, first of all, the death penalty is the law in the state of California, although we have a moratorium on it now. So I took an oath of office to uphold the law. So what I do in my office is one of the things I have done is revamp the death penalty or the capital case protocol, the method in which we use to figure out what we're going to do on those cases. We put it in writing, and we shared it with the defense and the public defender, and they'd never seen it before. It was a mystery to them how we made those decisions. I have a senior committee that reviews the facts of the case with a trial lawyer who's assigned. And I don't go to those meetings because the system is set up, or this protocol is set up, for those lawyers to have a free-flowing, full discussion without my being there, without me influencing them in some way. They have to make a decision as to what they as a committee recommend to me, and then I take that recommendation. I have the ability, of course, and I have done this, to talk with the lawyers, to go over all of the material, and of course I do that. This is the most serious decision that a district attorney can make, and I have made that decision to seek the death penalty or not to seek the death penalty. Fortunately, we live in a very safe community. We don't have very many homicides, even though one is too many. But I have made the decision to seek the death penalty in just a few of the worst of the worst of the worst offenders.
Okay. Well, now we're near the end of the program, and the last part is to have closing statements by each of the candidates. And since Ms. Carr started with the opening statement, Jeff Rosen will give the first closing statement. And you'll each have 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I was talking about a week ago with a venture capitalist to encourage him to contribute to my campaign. And he said, "What's your big idea? What's your big idea?" I think this is how these guys talk. And I said, "My big idea is an old idea, ethics and integrity in the criminal justice system. And that's what I'm running to restore." One of the things that I've one of the pledges that I've made is that when I'm the district attorney, I will not begin fundraising until at the earliest a year before the election. Now, why is that important? Because let's have at least 3 years of the district attorney focused full-time on doing the people's business. This district attorney was raising money continuously from the day she was elected into office. And the problem with that is that it splits your focus from focusing on the important work of the district attorney, and it also makes doing favors for campaign contributors a lot more tempting. You see, this is a district attorney that said to you, on the one hand, I don't want to be present when my lawyers are discussing whether or not to seek the death penalty, as though they can't speak freely in front of the district attorney, which is apparently what she thinks. And so she doesn't want to be involved in that. But when a wealthy campaign contributor calls her on a theft case, remember we have 45,000 cases a year, the case that the district attorney chooses to get involved in and follow up and make phone calls just happens to be the case of a wealthy campaign contributor. Let's just call it what it is and what everyone knows. It's a favor for a campaign contributor. So I would encourage the district attorney, Ms. Carr, to sign the pledge that I've signed myself, and I'm going to commit myself to this whether or not she does, to not begin raising money until at the earliest a year before the election, and also not to raise money from different people after the election that you don't know about. So Ms. Carr loaned herself over $50,000 in the last election and then had new and different contributors pay that off after the election, which you didn't know about.
Thank you again for being here tonight. My opponent has said a number of things that are inaccurate or distorted, and I really ask you, before you make the important decision to vote, to take a look at my website, dolorescarr.com. Look at the part that says setting the record straight, and you'll see the truth there. I'm proud of the record that I have. I was a judge for 6 years. I had a sterling reputation as a deputy district attorney and as a judge. But there's only one candidate up here tonight who's been criticized by the Court of Appeal for committing prosecutorial misconduct during the course of a trial, and that's my opponent, but you don't hear him say that. Now is not the time to learn how to be the DA on the job. My opponent is like a police officer. He goes out in his car and he makes arrests and he writes his report and he does a good job, goes to court and testifies. He now goes in and says, I'm ready to be the chief of police. Well, I suggest to you that with the issues that we have coming down in the future, more budget cuts, medical marijuana dispensaries opening up in our communities, we have early releases from prison with people getting out of prison with no parole supervision. We have a lot of challenges ahead of us, and what we really need to have is someone who is experienced and who has shown the leadership. And one of the ways I've done that is to make sure that we have a fair hearing in court. I took an oath of office because I'm the DA who represents each and every one of you who live in Santa Clara County. And if I see that there is a judge who is not giving us a fair hearing, us being the people, the attorneys who are representing victims of crime, how many cases of yours am I going to lose before I stand up and take a tough position, even though it subjects me to criticism by the newspaper or by my opponent? But what I am going to do is I'm going to stand up for victims. I'm going to use the tools of the law that allow me to make those tough decisions, and I pledge to you I'm going to continue to do that to make sure you are safe.
Well, I'd like to thank our two candidates for being willing to come tonight and answer these very tough questions. It's very kind of you, and it's a real important part of the civic process. On behalf of the League of Women Vote, I'm thanking you not just as myself, but on behalf of the Los Altos Mountain View League of Women Voters, the Palo Alto League of Women Voters, the American Association of University Women, KMTV, the Los Altos Library, and the Mid-Peninsula Media Center. We really appreciate your time, and we also appreciate your being willing to take part in public service and run. It's a lot of effort.